Remember when gas was less than $1 a liter and you didn't need to take out a loan to buy groceries? That wasn't that long ago. Everything has changed, including how we all need to budget.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
But as I wrote about in my book, Great Talk on Your Money, Chapter 17, page 151, I think budgeting is a waste of time, primarily because you won't do it. It's like counting calories on your new diet. You'll do it for a few days and maybe for a few weeks, but then you lose interest and you pig out on Oreos and you wish you never started the diet in the first place. But I digress. The 50-30-20 budget. So let's start by you telling us what in the world is the 50-30-20 budget.
Well, it's a way to easily allocate where your money's going. So you're basically taking 50% for needs such as rent, mortgage, car, groceries, utilities, basic clothing, minimum debt payments, those kinds of things. Then 30% goes to wants such as eating out, above basic clothing, extra grooming, streaming services, that kind of thing. Savings is the last 20%. Well, I should say the 20% is savings, but also more than your minimum debt payments if you're trying to pay down debt. So that's the 50-30-20.
So I'm going to poke all sorts of holes in this because I'm, of course, not a budgeting guy anyways. But before I do that, who is this designed for? Who was this 50-30-20 budget concept created to help?
Well, it's created to help really the average income earner, because if you're a low or income earner or it's a temporary income problem, you're focused on your needs, and that's all the money that you have for. And then high income earners, they're going to have a lot more money towards wants and savings. So the average income earner can benefit from a percentage structure.
And so the advantage of this is what? What's good about this approach?
It's easy to implement. Like you just parse it out and it's percentage. So you're not picking a number, you're picking a percentage of the income that you're bringing in. So it's a good way to start.
My big problem with budgeting, like I said in the intro, is it's hard to do. So, okay, I'm going to allocate 50% of this, 30, okay, I've got to be doing math. And what happens if I really need to spend 55% on that and only 25% on that? So now I've kind of messed it up. And so I got a problem with that. My other problem, though, is I don't think the math even works. So we know from our Joe Detter study that we publish every year, and I'll put a link in the show notes, but you can go to joedetter.ca and see it. Last year, so in 2021, our average client had take-home pay of about $2,600 a month. So I'm going to let you criticize this by telling me the numbers. So go through $2,600 and, how much is 50%, how much is 30%, how much is 20%. In fact, I can tell you what 50% of $2,600 is. It's $1,300. I did that in my head, okay, because I'm pretty good at the math thing here.
Excellent.
50% is for needs. So $1,300 for needs, that's not possible.
No, especially right now. It isn't possible right now. If you're looking at rent for one bedroom in Ottawa, it's $1,618 on average based on rentals.ca, and Toronto's like 2013. So automatically, if your average income is $2,700, it's not going to work at all. So that's where you don't necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, 50-30-20 doesn't work. You adjust it and say, okay, maybe I need to be putting 80% towards needs right now, and then adjust the different percentages.
I am of the view that what you should do is set everything up and just forget it. So, okay, my hydro bill, I get paid every 2 weeks at work, so I'm going to figure out what half of my hydro bill is, and every 2 weeks I'm just going to automatically set the computer up to pay it, and that's it. That's budgeting to me. And the advantage of that is if you get paid every 2 weeks and you're paying half your hydro bill every 2 weeks, at the end of the year, you'll have made 2 extra payments. You'll have all this extra money and you didn't have to think about it. Boom. There you go. That's the show. Thanks for watching. That was but there's more to say about that. Now,
in theory, yeah, but you can automate, but you still have to pay attention. You still got to have a handle on what's going on and make sure that maybe the bill didn't change this month with a surprise, or that the money is actually there in the account. So you have to be a little more systematic than just, set it and forget it.
You say I'm overly simplistic. Okay, well, we can debate that.
I think the traditional idea of a budget is hard for people, especially for people to stick to consistently, like you mentioned.
Okay, so the traditional idea of a budget. That's an excellent segue. We should have put that in the script. That would have been really good. So let's talk. And I agree, you have to know where your money's going. You have to keep track of it. I just don't think writing down every penny every day is necessarily the best way to do that. So let's talk about ways to manage your money that are not traditional budgeting. There is certainly some benefit to budgeting. I run a corporation, and having a budget for the corporation is kind of important, so you know what money's coming in and where you can spend it. So I'm a bit hypocritical saying, oh, well, you don't need a budget for yourself personally, and yet in my company I maintain a budget so I know where we're going. And I think that's really the point of a budget. It's so that you can point yourself in the right direction.
Right.
Do you agree with that? Like, is that the whole point of why one would have a budget?
Absolutely. Having a budget helps give you ground. It gives you financial stability. It helps you with better money management. It kind of gives you a roadmap. So a budget does help. I don't mind the set and forget part of the budget, but I think that you need to do a budget before you can set your bills and then forget about them. So I do like to do a budget. I do one monthly and I do one annually.
What's a pay cycle? And, what are the different pay cycles?
Okay, that's easy. Sure. So a pay cycle is how often you get paid. How often does your employer write you a paycheck? And there's 5 different options for how you can get paid. Let's start with the easy one. So there's weekly. You get paid every single week. Then you could get paid biweekly. So it would be every other week, maybe every other Thursday. So you get paid 26 times a year. You could get paid semi-monthly. So the 1st and the 15th, getting paid twice a month. You could get paid monthly, so maybe on the 15th or the 1st or whatever day your employer does it. And last, you could be paid what we would call periodically. So maybe if you're self-employed or a contractor and you're never really sure exactly when the money's going to come in or how much it's going to be.
We're dealing with here are general concepts. Roughly half of your budget goes towards, things like, needs. So you define needs as, rent and food. I guess those would be like the 2 big ones, utilities. Yep. So stuff I have to spend on. So, okay, maybe it can't be 50% given what your income is. Maybe it has to be 60% or some higher number, but you're still kind of shooting for a certain level is what you're talking about.
Right. Like if you're looking at the numbers for a single person, just basic rent, utilities, cell phone, those kinds of things. You're looking at 85% of your income. If it's $2,700 net a month, that's going towards needs. So automatically 50, 30, 20 isn't going to be your go-to. As a person, if you're a family of 3 with a 2-person income average, then you're looking at about 73% of your income going towards needs if you're including a car with that. So you can't do the 50, 30, 20, but I still think you can still do a percentage. It's still a good place to start.
Let's start with the monthly one. And a lot of people watching are going to go, well, nobody gets paid monthly. Yeah, as a matter of fact, they do. I've got lots of people. They tend to work in IT and high tech. They're probably on contract, and the contract is you bill once a month, you get paid once a month. So what's the problem with that? That sounds pretty good to me, right? I'm getting paid every month. I pay my bills every month. What's the problem?
Yeah. Well, it's great for things like your rent. You get paid, you feel like you're flush with cash, you've got all the money in the world, you pay your bills, yippee. But then 2 weeks later, suddenly the money might run out. You can sometimes get a little overconfident with your money when you get paid monthly at the beginning of the month because you feel like you have so much and you go a little crazy with your spending. And then before you know it, you've run out at the end of the month.
Yeah. And I guess if you're spending 100% of your income on needs, which a lot of people are, then okay, not a whole lot I can do in terms of savings and everything else, but in that case, I've got to focus on, well, what can I do to increase my income? What can I do to increase my expenses? Because I'm kind of out of whack. So I want to talk more about that, but let's go to the last point, which was savings. So
Right.
like 20% for savings seems, wonderful, but ridiculously unrealistic for the vast majority of people. I mean, for 100 years, all the financial gurus have said, save 10%. That's kind of that's biblical, right? I mean, tithing, that means 10%. I realize tithing is not the same as savings, but 10% seems to be an achievable goal. 20% seems like a really high number. Is that realistic for a typical person?
Well, and remember the 20% was including savings and debt repayment, right? So a lot of people carry debt. So you're not really saving 20%. You're using 20% for debt repayment and some savings.
Yeah, and I guess we could do a whole show on that. I'm of the view that you should pay off your debt, then worry about savings, because carrying a credit card balance with a 20% interest rate and putting $20 a month into your TFSA earning 0% makes no sense to me. But I do understand that there are people who believe you need to get into the savings habit, and the way to do that is to actually be saving money, even if it's a small amount, just to establish the habit. So explain the difference between bi-weekly and semi-monthly, because they both sound like every 2 weeks to me.
Yeah, so bi-weekly is truly every other week, which means there's going to be some months that you actually have 3 pays, which is sort of an added bonus, whereas semi-monthly is just the twice a month, and it's consistent. So it's 26 versus 24 payments a year.
So if you get paid bi-weekly, you get paid 26 times a year. There's 12 months in the year, which means you get an extra month's payment in effect during the course of the year, meaning there are 2 months of the year where you get 3 paychecks.
That's right. But what you have to remember for the other months in the year is that you have that extra pay isn't there in those months. So you can't just take your salary and divide it by 12 and figure that's what you're getting. You have to work with the money you've got when you're getting paid.
And you mentioned you got to check your bill. So what are you talking about there?
So not all bills are completely consistent month to month. They might vary by $5. They might vary by $50. It's hard to know, especially with things like usage of your hydro or water or things like that. You can't just assume that you know exactly what the amount is for if it's a bill that might vary. It's great to pay your bills as they come due if you have the discipline to set the money aside to get there. But let's be honest that a lot of people are really living paycheck to paycheck. So if you've got a bunch of bills that come due all at once, and you've already set up this automation, there's a good chance that you're going to run short of money. So
I understand with something like hydro, because it's, really big in the summer because I got the air conditioning on, but it's really low in the winter because I'm, using gas or whatever, and it's a lower number. So my system of just sending them $50 every paycheck isn't going to work, because in the summer, maybe I'm not paying enough. Maybe in the winter, I'm paying too much, although over the course of a year, it probably evens out. So if you were a proponent of my system, what do you suggest? You just check your bill every month to make sure you've sent them enough? What do you do?
Yeah, I would just have a reminder to yourself to check in and make sure that you've sent enough to cover it, maybe on your second payment. You can always set an alarm on your phone or in a calendar. Because remember, if you are late paying or you don't pay enough, you could incur late payment fees. You could start incurring some interest on the account, and suddenly that bill starts to get bigger and if you're not paying attention.
Well, things like you mentioned annual expenses. So, the holiday season, birthdays, my car insurance, they only charge me once a year, my house insurance. I mean, obviously you can get on a weekly or a monthly billing with that. So if I'm not keeping a budget, how do I handle those once a year expenses?
So what I would recommend, what I think is the best plan, is to divide it by 12 and every month put away, whatever that monthly installment towards the yearly expense is going to be, or you can do it even smaller than that, match it to your pay cycle. If you're paid 4 times, if you're paid weekly, then take it and divide it by 52, and every week tuck away that little bit. It's a much less painful way to pay a big expense too. If you're getting stressed out that you've got a big utility or a tax bill for the year coming up, suddenly you've got this money growing in an account off to the side, it's not as scary anymore.
It's simple enough to say, oh, well, look at my hydro bill in the month of January. Okay, but your hydro bill in the month of July is probably different depending on whether you have air conditioning and electric heat and gas heat and all the rest of it. So I guess part of the point of an annual budgeting exercise, which is what we're going to talk about today, is to look at a year. That's what annual means, and then sort it out from there. So is that why January is the time that you personally consider your annual budget? It's the start of a year. Does that make sense? Would it make more sense to do it in September when the kids go back to school? Like what's the thought process behind January?
Right. I mean, yeah, you can do a fiscal budget or a calendar budget. I like calendar. I just work with a calendar because it's easier. So I'm like, January 1st is the beginning of the new year. So I'll do that way. You could, if you wanted to go September to, end of August every year, you can do that. Whatever works for you, as long as I think once a year you sit down and go, okay, let me plan. But I like to start January 1st. I like calendar years and months, January 1st to January 31st. Like that's how I budget.
Well, and there is some sense to that too. If you're able to make a TFSA contribution or an RSP contribution or something like that, they're all based on a calendar year as well. So
what you can do with that is you can take a monthly expense and you can divide it by however many pays you get in a month. So if you're paid, twice a month or weekly, you divide it by that number. So let's talk about rent. Let's say you're paying $1,400 in rent. So if you get paid weekly, you would divide that by 4. And every pay, you'd put away $350, which is your rent divided by 4, and make sure that at the time the rent is due, you're going to have that $1,400 ready to go. So try and be paying your landlord out of that account that you're using to set aside the cash, and you won't have a problem paying your rent on time.
I do agree with the concept of taking a step back and taking a look at everything, which is really, really what we're talking about. So, okay, walk us through. Let's go right to the practical advice part of the show rather than me rambling on about why this is all bad. So walk us through the steps of how you would get started working on an annual budget. What's the process? Are you looking at last year and then looking at this year? Like, how do you actually do it in real life?
So I look at both. Right. So I will look at past statements. So typically, you'll get notification if things increase, but hydro, like your bills tend to stay relatively the same. So I'll say, well, what's been my monthly bill for hydro, for internet, for, gas, like those things. And I will set that up automatically. So I will look at bank statements to get monthly bills for insurance and rent or mortgage payments like that. And then I do look forward to the future for things that didn't happen in the past, but I expect to happen this coming year. Look at it. So the annual budget is the culmination, obviously, of the months. Mm-hmm. So when I'm doing the annual budget, I'm taking my average monthly expenditures from what I've estimated from the prior year and multiplying by 12. So when I look at my income on an annual basis, I'm like, this is my net income that I expect to come in over the next 12 months. This is what I expect to pay for mortgage, insurance, car payment, all of those things like hydro, electricity, and I chunk it down that way, but it's all annualized. And I love doing it that way because nothing sticks in your mind more than a large amount. Like you can feel like you can fit room in your budget. Oh, I can afford $200. That's no big deal. Oh, wait a minute. That's $2,400 in a year. Is it worth it to me? Like it gives you that opportunity to challenge the choices that seem to be okay on a monthly basis, but aren't necessarily when you look at it fully for the year that you've talked about. But the other fun stuff, the annual budget still has to cover off where that money is coming from. So, some years I'm like, okay, we're going to go camping 3 times and this is how much it costs based on da-da-da-da-da. And then you get partway through the year, you're going to have to look at your budget and go, okay, something happened. This is where I'm at now. I'm going to do a 6-month budget and project out how much money I'll get for the rest of the year and what costs are coming up for the rest of the year and what do I need to adjust. And sometimes, and it happened, obviously, where I was like, okay, we're not going camping 3 times this year. We're going to go camping once and we're going to do this thing instead. And then the rest of the money is going to go back into the budget because life went sideways a bit, and that happens all the time.
You meet with people who are in debt and are coming in to you to file a consumer proposal or bankruptcy, but then you also meet with a bunch of people once the process is started, because as listeners to this show will know, everyone who files a bankruptcy or a consumer proposal is going to have 2 budgeting sessions, what we call credit counseling sessions, where we teach them some tools to get a fresh start. So when you are meeting with someone in that environment, going through the numbers, giving them advice for the future, what are some practical tips that you are giving them to help them, get back on track, either using the 50, 30, 20 or wherever else you would like to begin?
Great. There are and to be honest, like when you're in a budgeting session, it's going to be driven on who's in front of you because everyone is different. And not only, so different budgeting styles will help different people, but also as an individual, the way you budget will evolve as well. So, it's a good recognition that some form of budgeting is important to you as a person, but it needs to reflect something that you're actually going to do and not something that you're going to feel obligated or guilty because you're not doing it.
Things like credit cards. Even if you're not carrying a balance, you want to make sure your monthly credit card bill in particular is paid off on time. If you're even $1 over on or under on your paying your bill, that's a late credit card bill, and you can potentially be skyrocketing yourself into a very high interest credit card payment all of a sudden. So you can get into trouble really fast with interest on late bills. So it's really important that you're on top of that and that you're doing the right thing by automating your payments and you're trying to do your best to get in there. But you don't want to set it and forget it, and then suddenly you're shortchanging yourself anyway.
Well, and you've raised the issue of debt, so I want to get into that. The one final point on the automation. This is hard to do when you're first starting. Mm-hmm. Because if today is the 23rd of the month and my rent is due on the 1st and I don't have any savings, I can't just put one paycheck's worth into my savings account. So what I find is it generally takes a few months to build up to the point where you can actually do this so that I'm actually ahead. I have to have saved up a full month's rent by the 1st of next month. That's a lot easier to do starting at the beginning of the month than at the end of the month. So bear in mind as we discuss this that, okay, you may not be able to get up and running with it immediately. It may take a bit of time, but okay, start with your smaller bills and work up to the bigger ones over a period of time. Are there other budgeting styles we need to talk about other than what we've just talked about? Are there other ways to do this? Of course, my style is don't budget at all, pre-program everything. I know that my hydro bill is $100 a month. I get paid every week, so I just set it up to send $25 every week to the hydro company, and it's simple. Are there other ways to be accomplishing the same thing?
Definitely, I do. I love recommending that everyone pay their bills on paydays. People have so much success with their budget once they start doing that. But that doesn't take into account those different things like clothing. Like we can put clothing in the budget, but then when you're doing a budget session with someone, I'm like, well, did you buy clothes? No. Do you have the money set aside for clothing as per budgeted? No. Okay, so then what are you going to do when, you need to buy a winter coat or it's back to school or whatever? You're going to scramble in that moment to try to find the money to buy that. And the whole goal of budgeting is to end that scramble. So I always recommend that they have a checking account and then two separate savings accounts. I have one savings account in that same bank, and I have looked at my annual budget. I know I'm going to spend $2,400 a year on gifts and clothing. So I make sure $200 goes into that savings account every single month. Right? It's automated as well.
Yes, I just want to say that managing your cash flow and budgeting, they're tools that are meant to help you. So it's important that you're honest with yourself when you're setting up your plan about where and when you spend your money so that your tools are going to be useful and you're going to keep using them. If you set up a budget or a system that's based on an ideal reality or what someone else tells you your goals should be, it's not going to work.
Yeah. Even if you don't like to go back in time and look at statements, right? Most people that I meet that don't really want to budget, they still have an idea of what they spend on expenses. So you can still kind of have that gist. And then the only thing that I would say, if someone who doesn't like to budget, before you spend money, at least make a list of things that you want to achieve. Like Even if you don't budget, just have an idea of where you'd like your money to go. So that every time you go to spend money, you're like, okay, well, I have money for this. I love to go, I don't know, hiking. I want to get a kayak, right? If you're spending money on this because you don't have a budget, nothing's set up, are you going to be able to get that kayak? Like, how are you working your system? So sometimes if you don't want to have a budget, then just operate with thinking before you spend, which is always a great idea, and trying to spend the least amount possible. Sometimes that's the best budget. I'm just going to not spend money as much as possible and see where that gets you. Or you can spend 2 months, like if you normally hibernate in the winter, and you don't go out, well, then you've just saved a bunch of money. So just make sure you don't spend it and put it towards something.
Watching here, if you are in a position where, I just can't keep making these payments, go to hoys.com. You can click around. If you want to talk to Maureen, you can send her a message through there, or any one of our other professionals. What was that phrase you said? Broke can be fixed. I like that. I'd never heard that one before. That's good. So, and I agree with that, but you got to actually take some action and do it.